This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Laura Trevelyan. President Trump is in Pittsburgh to offer his condolences after the synagogue shooting, as the community is divided over his presence. 1 week to go and counting. Ahead of the US midterm elections, we visit a swing district in Pennsylvania. Winning here is key to Democrats' chances of taking the House. Plus, Rooney mania is sweeping America's capital. How the former England striker brought star power to Washington soccer, and how he's enjoying the change of scenery.
A bit more relaxing for us as a family. I think if you want to go to the supermarket or you want to pop out and get a coffee, then it's quite easy to do.
Welcome to our viewers on public television here in the US and also around the globe. President Trump and his family have visited the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh to offer condolences to those who lost loved ones in Saturday's shooting. The first funerals of those killed by the gunman have been taking place. The White House says the president is there to grieve with the community, but there are divisions within Pittsburgh over whether he should have come. Our correspondent Jane O'Brien is in the city and joins me now. So Jane, what is the president doing while he's there in the city?
Well, he paid a visit to the synagogue, and although this is still a crime scene and clearly nobody can be allowed into the main building, he was able to go into the vestibule with the rabbi who leads this congregation and light a candle and say some prayers. He was with the First Lady Melania Trump and also his daughter Ivanka, who converted to Judaism when she married Jared Kushner, who is Jewish. They both were with him. They were able to go in and say some prayers as well. Then afterwards they came outside and they came to this makeshift shrine that has been growing as the days have been progressing, and were able to lay some flowers and also some stones from the White House at these Stars of David behind me that all bear the names of the 11 victims.
And Jane, you have been in the city since just after the shooting. What's the mood like now as the president visits and those first funerals take place?
Well, everybody I've spoken to has said that the focus should be today on the victims. As you say, the first funerals have been taking place, and people have felt very strongly that the president's visit has been somewhat of a distraction, that it's taken the emphasis of the mourning and the tributes away from the victims and put it onto him, and that's something they really wanted to avoid. They wanted today to be about remembering the victims, and those funerals are going to be going on throughout the week. Even people who broadly welcomed his presence and said that it was absolutely fitting that the President of the United States should be here to pay his respects and show solidarity with the community. They just wished that he delayed his visit. On the other hand, there's also been thousands of people who signed a petition saying they objected to his presence under any circumstances because they feel that his rhetoric, that his divisive speech has contributed to an environment in which hate can thrive.
And Jane, you've talked to people who worship at the synagogue. What is the mood there?
They're just desperately sad. They don't understand why this happened to them. This is an integrated community. All day I've seen Muslims, Catholics, believers, non-believers coming here to show solidarity, and for such a thing to happen here is inconceivable to them.
Jane O'Brien there in Pittsburgh, thank you. Well, the US midterm elections are just a week away, and Democrats will need big wins in key races if they hope to retake the House. Take the battleground of Pennsylvania's 7th district. The demographics there have been shifting, with large numbers of Democrats registering to vote in this election. Edith Tawfiq reports now on the fight for Lehigh Valley and what victory there could mean for either party.
Pennsylvania's 7th district is a microcosm of America, from its industrial heartland and booming suburbs to its expansive rural lands. Democrats must win in mixed areas like these if they have any chance of taking back the U.S. House of Representatives. This longtime Republican seat is now open, so voters have been getting to know the fresh faces vying for their support. Democrat Susan Wild, who leads in the polls, and Republican Marty Notstein, an Olympic gold medalist.
Thank you, thank you.
At this debate, the candidates faced questions from voters. Marty Notstein focused on the economy and its strength under President Trump, while Susan Wild hoped her and the Democrats' position on health care would help flip the seat.
Do you feel finally Democrats can take this seat?
I don't take anything for granted. I know that I have to work for every vote that I get.
Polls have you down. How are you feeling?
Well, we're feeling good. You know, these are the same pollsters that didn't predict Donald Trump was going to win.
Just days until the election, most in this room have already made up their minds, thanks in part to President Trump.
I just can't believe his moral background and the way he talks, that people are supporting him. I don't get the mentality.
If the Democrats win the House, they're going to just impede Trump. That's our whole mission.
It's not just the national political environment helping Democrats. Shifts in demographics could also help push this region more to the left.
This district is moderate at its core, but there are signs that could be changing. Voter registration is way up, and new Democrats outnumber Republicans 4-1.
Professor Chris Borick is an analyst who has been closely monitoring the race.
New registrants are usually younger voters, and they tend to break Democrat. But in this particular cycle, that's accentuated. It's been pushed up, and so Democrats, if these new voters do turn out, and there's some signs that they're going to be more likely to turn out, really does give a boost to the Democrats.
Hey Eric, this is Matt Conley calling from the Marty Notstein campaign. How are you?
In the final days of this campaign, it will come down to which candidate can get their message out best.
We're just reaching out to voters from Susan Wild's campaign.
And which party can turn out the votes. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, Pennsylvania.
And Pennsylvania's 7th district is about an hour's drive from Philadelphia, where the roots of America's democracy took hold. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were signed there, and the city even served as the nation's capital at the end of the 18th century. Today, it's a diverse centre of business, education, arts, and of course, politics. The BBC's Catty Kay is there, and I spoke with her earlier. Catty, Pennsylvania is nicknamed the Keystone State. Could it hold the keys to unlocking the House of Representatives on election night?
You know, I've just spoken to a couple of officials from this state, the current mayor, who says, yeah, absolutely, everybody is looking at those suburbs outside of this city of Philadelphia. They are suburbs where people could go either way, and particularly where Democrats hope that women voters, some women voters who may have voted for Donald Trump 2 years ago, but don't like the kinds of things that they've heard out of the White House, they don't like some of his tone, they don't perhaps like some of what he said about immigration. Those are the kinds of voters that could switch party now and vote for a Democratic candidate. If the Democrats take back the House of Representatives, it will be because of suburbs outside of cities like this one.
Well, Catty, from what you're saying, even though Donald Trump isn't actually on the ballot this time, this election is indeed all about him in a state that he narrowly won in 2016.
Yeah, it's totally a referendum on Donald Trump. Midterm elections quite often are a referendum on the president in this country, but I think this one more so than ever because Donald Trump is such an unusual president. And Republicans, I sense, and I don't know what you feel about this, Laura, but a couple of weeks ago, they were feeling pretty confident all around the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. They thought that played well for Republicans. But just in this last week, the election seems to be closing a bit and Democrats seem to be doing a bit better. There's an interesting poll that came out yesterday in the Gallup poll that showed that in the course of the past week, the week in which we've had those pipe bombs, the week in which there was the mass murder in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, President Trump's approval rating has gone from 44 to 40. Now, 4-point drop in the space of just 1 week. That is quite a significant drop. And if, to the extent that this is about Donald Trump, a decline in his approval ratings is not good for Republican candidates.
And Catty, those suburban women outside Philly, could they also be crucial to what happens?
I think women are always important in American elections. They've decided the last 3 U.S. presidential elections just because they vote in bigger numbers
than men do, and it seems that women's disaffection with Donald Trump since the 2016 election has grown much more than men's has. I mean, we're almost getting to the stage, Laura, where you could kind of divide the parties between the Democratic Party, which is leaning female, and the Republican Party, which is leaning male. It's another of those emerging splits in American society, just because women's approval of Donald Trump has declined so dramatically in the course of the last 2 years.
Katty Kay in Philadelphia for us tonight. Thank you. And President Trump added to the midterm mix earlier by declaring in an interview he plans to end birthright citizenship. That's the right of a baby born here in the US to be an American citizen, regardless of where the baby's parents are from. It's enshrined in our Constitution via the 14th Amendment. Mr. Trump's bombshell came in this interview with Axios.
Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
Have you talked about that with council?
Yeah, I have.
So where in the process?
It's in the process. It'll happen.
We should note there are actually more than 30 countries where citizenship is a right given at birth. That includes most nations in North, Central and South America. For more, I spoke earlier with our North America reporter, Anthony Zerka. The president says that he can do this by executive order. Can he?
Well, that's a stretch. As we mentioned, the 14th Amendment says at the very beginning, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That is a pretty clear-cut language, and it would be quite a task to overcome that just in an executive order. There's talk maybe a congressional law could handle it, but even Paul Ryan said that it would be straight-up unconstitutional. Donald Trump has talked about this in the past, but it would take a lot of work to get this through.
And also, who is it exactly that the president was talking about there? My son was born here when I was a legal immigrant, but is he really talking about children born to undocumented immigrants?
Well, that was vague. We don't know exactly what this yet-to-be-released executive order would look like or legislation in Congress. Yeah, it seems like probably they're talking about people who came over illegally, had children while here, and they are currently granted citizenship. But he could also be referring to people, tourists who come over, have their children here just to get U.S. citizenship, or perhaps even green card holders, although the Supreme Court has directly addressed that about 100 years ago, where there are people who are here legally, not U.S. citizens, had a child here, and that person was determined to be a U.S. citizen.
So is this really much more about style rather than substance? The president pulling an electoral rabbit out of the hat with a week to go?
I think that certainly could be one of the issues here. We are a week away from the midterms. I think Donald Trump wants to talk about immigration. Yesterday we had the order out of the Defense Department of 5,000 troops going to the border to prepare for a caravan of immigrants coming up that may not even arrive here for a couple of months. Today he's talking about birthright citizenship. He views immigration as a winning issue. He campaigned on it in 2016. He's reaching back for it again. It's comfortable ground. Right now, it's not a top issue for voters. Health care, the economy is higher. He wants to change that.
Anthony, you know the president's schedule with a week to go until the midterm elections. Where's he campaigning and how does this issue play into where he's going?
He is barnstorming the United States over the next 6 days, 11 stops. And if you look at these states, 2 stops in Florida, 2 stops in Missouri, 2 stops in Indiana. These are all states that have key Senate races where there are Democrats trying to run for re-election in states that Donald Trump carried in 2016. In fact, there's only one state on this list, Georgia, that does not have a Senate election. And none of these states were states that Donald Trump didn't carry in 2016.
Anthony Zerka, thanks so much for decoding all that for us.
My pleasure.
In other news now, the notorious Boston mobster James Whitey Bulger has been killed in prison. He was once one of the FBI's most wanted criminals and later became an informant. The FBI has begun an inquiry after the 89-year-old was found dead in his cell in West Virginia, shortly after he'd been transferred there from a Florida prison. At least 9 people have died in Italy after heavy flooding and gale-force winds battered the country on Tuesday. Extreme conditions in other parts of southern and central Europe have blocked roads and left thousands without power. Meteorologists say the bad weather will continue as the storms head north. A former nurse in Germany has admitted to killing 100 of his own patients in a case that's shocked the country. On the first day of his trial, Niels Hergel said he had administered fatal doses of medication on a massive scale. Detectives say he wanted to impress his colleagues by resuscitating the people he'd just poisoned. Jenny Hill has more.
Hiding his face, post-war Germany's most prolific serial killer. Niels Hergel preyed upon the elderly and infirm. He's now known to have killed more than 100 people, but investigators say we'll never really know the true scale of his crimes. Hergel found his victims on the wards of 2 North German hospitals. He systematically administered fatal doses of medication before trying to resuscitate the very patients he'd attacked. Among the victims, this man's grandfather. Christian told us he wrote to Hergel in prison to ask why.
He just said that he lost the contact to people, to human beings lying there. It was just bodies for him. He was killing everyone he could get, just playing with them, like someone who is using something mechanical, something like a computer. You switch a body on and off.
In court for the confession, the families of the dead. Many had no idea their loved ones were murdered until investigators exhumed their remains. They've accused the hospitals of turning a blind eye to high death rates. By doing so, they say, managers facilitated the murderous ambition of a man whose crimes have shocked this country. Jenny Hill, BBC News.
An absolutely horrifying story. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. How the food we eat is destroying one of South America's most famous savannas. In Indonesia, an underwater search has begun for the wreckage of the Lion Air plane which crashed into the Java Sea on Monday. There were 189 passengers and crew on board, but there's been no sign of any of the survivors. Rebecca Henschke reports now from Jakarta.
At the crash site, divers have been deployed to try to locate the plane's black boxes. Finding that will help investigators work out what went wrong. President Joko Widodo inspecting the wreckage and promising a full investigation.
This was the first Boeing 737 MAX 8 to crash. A technical log obtained by the BBC shows that there were problems on a previous flight. But Lion Air insisting that those problems were solved and the plane was given a full clearance to fly. Here, what's left of the plane, as well as people's possessions, are being laid out here at the port.
For the families, it's another day of waiting.
Families have been told to come here to this police hospital where the remains that have been recovered from the wreckage of the plane have been brought. Here families are being asked to give DNA samples, pieces of clothing, anything that can help officials here to identify people.
Suria's family has flown in from Bangka in the hope of getting some closure. Her little sister was on the plane.
We just desperately want some news to give us a sense of peace. That is all.
Rebecca Henschke, BBC News, Jakarta.
Our demand for cheap food is linked to deforestation and a devastating loss of wildlife. So says the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Farming is partly responsible, with more land needed to meet the global demand for cheap protein such as soybeans. The Cerrado Savannah in Brazil is one of the world's most overexploited areas. Our correspondent Adina Campbell reports now from Brazil.
It's an area the size of Western Europe. The Cerrado Savannah in the heart of Brazil is one of the most biodiverse places in the world, home to thousands of plant and animal species. But as each day passes, they're in danger from this. The fire over there is an example of the problem here in the heart of the Cerrado. The land has deliberately been set on fire, and there's a good chance the land is being cleared for soy production in the future. 80% of land in Brazil is supposed to be for public use. But as more space is needed to grow soybeans, the law is being ignored, leading to land grabbing on a vast scale.
There's a clear lack of governance in this region. So the law enforcement is not good enough by far. So when you see all the land rights of local communities, that is not respected.
This farming company prides itself on producing soy in a sustainable way by reusing land that's already been spoilt. Valdemir Menezes manages the farm.
As soon as we find a new area of land, whether it's for sale or rent, we have a team of specialists that investigates the history of that land.
But most farms aren't like this. Others will obtain land by any means. And it's the local communities who suffer. For 4 generations, the Gomez Lopez family lived off open land in the Cerrado. Marieni says they were forced to leave, their home burnt down and their land sold.
They took everything from us. We weren't allowed to bring anything. All the cattle, everything, it was all left behind. It was all destroyed.
People and land under pressure, fueled by the way our food is produced. Conservationists say we have 10 years to save South America's most valuable savanna. Otherwise, all this could soon vanish. Adina Campbell, BBC News, in the Cerrado, Brazil.
The cost of cheap food. Well, if you're a sports fan here in Washington, there's a new household name, and it's Wayne Rooney. The former England striker transferred from Everton to DC United. Since then, he's brought the local club from obscurity to a prime spot in the playoffs. The BBC's Natalie Perks caught up with the star and has this report.
As England's all-time record goalscorer, Wayne Rooney has always played at the highest level. But at 33 years old, he's just taken on his toughest career challenge.
All right, DC, let's get to work.
He told me he's not just in America for a vacation, though.
Of course, you have people who maybe compare you to other players who've come over here and not done so well. You know, people can make their opinion on you after the DC you played. I couldn't really play and take my foot off the pedal.
Rooney's arrival has been big news here.
When Wayne Rooney arrived in D.C. back in late June, the team was in last place in the Eastern Conference.
He was the spark they needed to go on a major run and reach the playoffs. With a basic wage of more than £2 million a year, but with total earnings reportedly more than double that, he's the highest paid player in the club's history. Shirt sales and ticket sales are up, but so is the level Rooney demands.
Last week we had won a game and it wasn't our best performance by any means. And he came in and said it wasn't good enough, and everyone was kind of thrown off, like, well, we just won the game. And he's like, that's not going to last in playoffs. So it was a nice, little, I guess, kick in the butt. Yeah, it was a wake-up call for us.
Well, DC is known for its fast pace and politics, yet life in the capital has afforded Rooney something he hasn't had in 17 years. The land of the free is living up to its name.
I think it's just a bit more relaxing for us as a family. I think if you want to go to the supermarket or you want to pop out and get a coffee, then it's quite easy to do, where at times in England it could be a bit difficult. I think just to be able to walk around and, you know, have a bit more space and a bit more time to enjoy with your family is something a bit different to what I'm used to.
He's living a different life now, albeit without Premier League pampering. Rooney is now flying economy and sharing hotel rooms.
I think it's important that you're part of the team. Wouldn't come in and start demanding things, and it's not, I don't see it as a big issue, to be honest.
He watched England's World Cup run as a fan for the first time since he was a kid. That childlike exuberance is coming through in his football again. The smile is back against all odds. Trophies could be too. Natalie Perks, BBC News, Washington.
And Rooney and his squad will be in action here in Washington on Thursday night for that much-anticipated playoff match. Remember, you can find much more on all the day's news at our website. Plus, to see what we're working on at any time, make sure to check us out on Twitter. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thanks for watching BBC World News America.